Aloha y'all, and welcome back to my channel. And I'm sorry if I sound a little bit congested, a little bit throaty. We are recovering from what could have potentially been the bubonic plague. In all reality, I had like a cold, and then I got better, and then I got like a sore throat and a cough and all that jazz, but I have been getting all kinds of stir crazy and all kinds of like, I gotta be productive, I gotta do things. So we're feeling a little bit human today, so I wanted to get some kind of video out. And today, as I was kind of going through, I filmed my if I could only keep 10 eyeshadow palettes, and I was thinking, you know, I've done my top 10 eyeshadow palettes, and you know how things change. Our opinions are different as the years go on. I was like, you know what would be an interesting video to sit down and really think about it, and what would have been my top 10 list, you know, say 4 or 5 years ago. Now that is just sort of an estimate, you know, it's not exactly 4 years, it's not exactly 5 years ago. It's just like, you know, what would have been on that top 10 list a while ago, and kind of going through and being like, looking at the palettes and being like, do I even still have these in my collection? Do I even still like them? You know, where are they now in the new current present day situation of my makeup collection and my likes and my interests and my dislikes and all that jazz? Because one thing that I really did learn with that, you know, if I could only keep 10, I was like, wow. Well, you know, there were quite a few palettes that stood out that I was like, a couple years ago, these palettes and these brands would have been on this list, but now they're not. So we're actually going to start out with the ones that are still in my collection for one reason or another, and then we'll do ones that are no longer in my collection, but we will have pictures for visualization. The first of which being the KVD Shade And Light eye palette. This is not the eye palette. Here's the eye palette. They're both currently in my makeup rotation, so you can understand my confusion. But when I finally got my hands on this palette, I was so happy. I did like so many different kind of like trad goth looks, you know, going on, and I was so into this black. Still one of my favorite blacks of this day. And this is a palette that I literally look at and I'm like, you know, I mean, part of why I pulled it into a makeup rotation is I look at it and I'm like, I should be using this more. Y'all know that I'm not typically the most neutral of a lover, but it's got these beautiful shades here. It's got some cool tones. This will be really good to be knocking out some visual K looks. You know, I have dug in pretty well into those two shades, that shade, and these ones. And while it still is a beautiful, viable palette, I feel like since this was kind of very much iconic and very much a staple in and of its time. And since then, you know, I've acquired and used things that are, you know, a little bit more my jam. You know, the ColourPop Going Coconuts palette, the ColourPop Brown Sugar palette. You know, I've got neutrals that I now know and love a lot more than these. While I still am trying to get a lot of use out of this because, you know, it's old. But just compared to other neutrals that I have in my collection that I've invested in, looking at those compared to this one, it's just kind of like, you know, yeah, this is a good neutral palette and it's got the quad thing going for it, but there are honestly other neutral palettes in the same price point and even a lower price point that I would suggest more to y'all, and that would, you know, kind of come out as being my staples, whereas this one is just kind of sitting there being all nice and fancy. Then if we're going to talk about neutral palettes from however many years ago, we've got to talk about the Lorac Pro 1 and the Lorac Pro 2. Now, I want to take a moment for y'all to appreciate, I don't know if you're going to be able to see on camera, do you see the dips in those matte shades in this palette? When I had this, when this was like, before I had a lot more makeup and before I kind of knew how to properly use makeup, I went in hard on this thing. I mean, mauve and sable. If this thing is still viable, I should probably try panning this year. I don't even know what I was using that white shade for, but it's got a big old dip in it too. With the second one, I've got dips in the cool gray, the plum, the charcoal, the black, the nectar. You know, I went really hard in on these things, and that was kind of before, You know, I was doing my makeup more. I was in my like, oh, I want to be a living doll stage, or I want to kind of have the same look, the same aesthetic every time I go out. You know, at that point, I was very committed to trying to make myself be like a end-all be-all goth type person, like the people I was idolizing at the time. And now looking at this, you know, while the colors are pretty and while they are nice for that, this just isn't a palette that's really gonna inspire my current aesthetic. You know, these are beautiful, neutral, kind of everyday, going into a little bit sultry, a little bit glam. You know, for someone who wants, you know, more of a safer color theory. It has nothing to do with the quality. Y'all know I love me some Lorac shadows, but it does have to do with the fact that I look at this and I'm not picking this up for my every kind of day makeup, because y'all know that this ends up being my every kind of day makeup, and I'm just not getting that from these two. So it's not that the quality has shifted. It's not that my thought on the formula has changed. It's what I look for in a palette and color theories that I'm interested. I have been holding on to these because these are absolutely perfect for when I do those undead, vampiric, whatever looks. But on a whole, as a day-to-day palette, neither of these are nearly anything of what I am looking for in my makeup looking for now. An oldie but a goodie, which I think most of these are, the Urban Decay Electric Palette. Now, once again, this isn't a case of, oh, well, I don't like the quality anymore, I don't like whatever. This is kind of a case of, when this came out, this was sort of the only sort of its kind. Like, bright colors were not a thing. You went to Urban Decay for bright colors, you know. At the time, we kind of went to Kat Von D. We'll get into that later. Not a lot of brands were really jumping on that crazy color bandwagon. And so this was obviously a favorite, and it's a favorite because this was my gateway drug into makeup. This was the first high-end palette I ever bought, because at the time I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm gonna take those blues, I'm gonna take that pink, and I'm gonna slather that all over my face. And it simply comes down to the fact that, well, one, this is discontinued no more. They don't make it no more, which if they did, I think that might make my preference, make my decision change a little bit. But you know, if you think about all the colorful, you know, all the purple, all the blue, all the pink, all the orange, you know, I've got ColourPop, I've got Anastasia, I've got Jeffree Star. I have so many other bright colors, and sort of in the vein of, you know, the Kat Von D Shade And Light, where at the time it was, you know, the one and only. Like I said, we've got a lot of bright colors. We've got, you know, single shadows from affordable brands. We've got palettes from affordable brands. We've got palettes from, you know, more expensive high-end brands. And so this one, while it's still, you know, this shade, beautiful, that shade, you know, while it still has some of those beautiful shades in it compared to so many of the other colorful things that I've tried and that I've got in my collection, it's become a thing of nostalgia rather than a thing of necessity or how much I use it or how unique it is. Then a palette that I honestly never thought would not be a favorite. This is kind of how we're tripping down memory lane. Y'all know for the longest time, ya girl loved peach. I still do. Peachy blushes are some of my favorite, but when the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette came out, I just about lost my ever-loving mind. This is another palette that I don't know if you can tell, but some of the shades, we've got some nice deep impressions in Puree, and Candied Peach, and Peaches and Cream, in Nectar, Caramelized. You know, I really went ham on this thing. This palette was also something that I had at a time, I wouldn't say the beginning, it was kind of like that mid-transformation when I was kind of doing my makeup a little bit haphazardly. I hadn't really learned a lot of the tricks of the beat at the time, you know, so I was just kind of throwing that all up in there and that all up in there and just kind of, I didn't have a lot of good technique established at the time. And while this palette is still really pretty, y'all know, recently, well, not so recently, compared to what I was back when I had, first got this palette, which this is from the initial first run of the Peach palette, and that tells you how old it is. But I have become a matte lover, and this palette is majority of shimmers. Now, when I was using these shimmers are that play very nicely together. They layer, they blend, they go nice into one another. I love this Bless Her Heart shade, this beautiful, deep, grungy green. But, once again, just compared to how I do my makeup now and color stories that I look for now, there are probably at least like 2-3 different green palettes that take the place of this, because the color stories, the matte to shimmer ratio, there's just a myriad of things that have changed that make this palette kind of just go onto the back burner. It's not really giving me, it's not that it's a bad palette, it's not that the color story is whatever, it's just that through my personal evolution, it just isn't giving me what I need. Then, it used to be fine, but with what I'm looking for now in my makeup, it's just not. I do need to pull this into a makeup rotation, though in all honesty, I should probably just pitch it because it's old and maybe possibly potentially at some point get a new one. But I would like to try some of these really pretty shimmers, incorporate them with another palette and see if I can maybe get a little bit more love for this one. But y'all know, for any of y'all who have been with me for an extended period of time, this was like one of my top 5 fave palettes for a long time. Then we might as well get one that's, some of y'all probably suspected. It's a limited edition job, but the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca. Now this palette is a hideously sentimental thing. I think I talked about this in Makeup I Can't Get Rid Of. It represents a certain hallmark, a certain time in my life, But you look at it, let me get it for you. And you look at this thing and you're like, oh, yes. Even looking at it now, this is such an aesthetically pleasing palette, layout, color story. But part of what this palette, has done, kind of like with the Urban Decay Electric, at the time, there wasn't a lot of this. At the time, there wasn't a lot of bright colors. There wasn't a lot of color theory out of neutral. We were kind of, this was I'm pretty sure this was pre-modern Renaissance. So we hadn't even started dipping into those like rosy, reddy neutrals. And so at the time, obviously I was down and bomb diggity. I've done a dent in this Rewind, this shade right here. This was these ones were my absolute favorite nose contouring shades for when I did my Visual K looks. I actually wore these neutrals on my wedding day. This shade here, there was just, the quality. This was really the golden age, the y'all have seen in my Kat Von D video. This was the peak and the pinnacle of that brand. This was the height. This was the rise and the golden age of the Roman Empire. And just the quality and the colors and so much about this. This was a favorite for so many years. I just absolutely loved it. And while it's still good, and while it's probably not safe to put on my eyes anymore, once again, it just suffers from the fact that we now have color. The fact that there are so many different mainstream brands that are coming out with either rainbow palettes or full color theory. We've got purple, we've got blue, we've got pink, we've got red, we've got green. That there isn't really a need for anyone to feel upset. I remember for the longest time, the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca Remix palette was the limited edition palette of all limited edition palettes to be the one that had gotten away. There's no need for that no more. You can go out and get you all kinds of whatever rainbow palette. While I still stood by the quality and the beautiful and the everything, I've got it now in a myriad of other incarnations. We got to talk about another Urban Decay one. We have this took me a while. Basically, this would have been an insert Vice palette here. I'm not even sure what this one is, you know, what incarnation, what 1, 2, 3, 12, 500. I kind of wish they would bring Vice palettes back. That would be a limited edition thing that I would get down with. I don't know if y'all can see, but in that shade Alien, there is a huge dip. One of my main go-to looks with this is I would start out with Alien, then I'd deepen it out in the V with Alchemy, and then we'd do Sonic on the under eye, and I would be good to go. This is another palette that I regularly reached for my visual K looks. We do the green, we do the blue, the purple, the reddy, the grungy. This was before my love of mattes, so we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mattes. And I was totally okay with that because I was all up into slather and a shimmer all up in that crease there, you know, but I love these. And I feel like the Vice palettes, you know, before, because they don't make them no more, at least they haven't. But this era of Vice palette here evokes a time of Urban Decay before their quality started being so hit and miss. Like, you could get a Vice palette and be pretty much guaranteed that it would be good quality. I have a lot of them still in my collection over there, and I thought, once again, they're reaching the point where I probably shouldn't be putting them on my face. But for the longest time, they were great quality, they were unique, they were something that was different, you know. And then now that the market has become less mainstream, less neutral, you know, bright colors are kind of now the thing, you know, going for all the different whatevers. You know, the Vice palette just kind of, it didn't age well. You know, people were looking for more curated, you know, very precise color stories, where this would just kind of be a little bit of a mishmash, an agglomeration of a bunch of different colors. And so as the market and desire and demand changed, you know, the Vice palette just kind of didn't age well with it and just sort of aged out of the community. But for the longest time, I was a die-hard Urban Decay Vice. This is a very important stepping stone for my makeup journey. All right, another palette that I don't have anymore, probably because it was old and I had other things, but this was another palette that was kind of instrumental. This was something that I used every blinking time. I did like my Dolly sunken in eyes kind of vampire look, but that was the Bekka Hombre Nudes palette. I think it only had like 4 or 5 shades in it, but I used these shiz out of that thing. That palette was honestly probably what kind of made me start loving mattes, because I noticed I liked shimmers and I liked all the crazy, you know, basically I'd be doing something like this but with all shimmer. But I think what I ended up liking is I liked the depth and definition that I was able to start getting from mattes that I really couldn't get from shimmers. And I loved this palette, and y'all probably would have seen I struggled, you know, for a couple declutters. I was like, oh, but I really like it, and I reached for it, and then I had to be like, kind of come to reality and be like, if you're gonna do that look, the look that you typically do with this, I'm sure you have it in other palettes. But it was something that was definitely a palette that I got my money's worth out of, and it was expensive. I think it was in like the $43, $44 range. For being a brand that mainly does highlighters, Bekka thought pretty highly of their eyeshadow. And so, you know, it was one of those things that was just, you know, I feel like it's really fun to reflect on your past favorites, because you look at them and you're able to kind of analyze them and think and be able to really tell what part they played in your makeup journey. You know, why were you reaching for that so much, or how did it help you develop into what you're reaching for now? Because that was really something that I was like, yeah, it's worth the money. It's fantastic. It's great. Whereas now, once again, with my neutrals and my neutral game, I've experienced so much more and so many different and more affordable and better formulas, honestly, where there ain't no way I'm gonna be like recommending paying y'all a 5 eyeshadow pan thing for $44. I'm like, go out and pick out however many ColourPop whatevers or get one of their pre-made palettes. Although the Bekka Hombre Nudes was definitely pre-ColourPop pressed eyeshadows. Another one that was very instrumental in shaping, you know, the kind of eyeshadow whatever that I am now, but the Lime Crime Original Venus, you know, that little 8-pan whateverness that was doing reddy, grungy, you know, those kind of shades before Modern Renaissance even did it. And I loved that palette. I created so many different looks out of that. That's another still in that kind of time era where I was doing all whateverness with shimmers, you know, it didn't matter, just shimmer everywhere, all over the face, you know, but it was obviously that precursor into, you know, Modern Renaissance, Blood Sugar, Lime Crime Venus XL, but at the time, once again, it was something we hadn't seen before. And so it's kind of, you know, I totally understand why that would have been a fave for me back then, because it was really evoking. It was just a small little taste of what I would eventually evolve into in the future. And now I don't think I would ever repurchase that one. I discarded, decluttered mine. The mirror fell out. You know, the formula was starting. I had it for a long time. But I have, you know, now that we do have an expanse of red toned eyeshadows, I'm sure I can dupe. And, you know, even just in the Lime Crime Venus XL. But, you know, it's just something that's so interesting to look back and you really, you know, think about the evolution of makeup on a whole, not even just your journey. You're thinking like back then how like that little 8-pan palette was so revolutionary in that unique color story. And now there's like, you can't, you know, there's a red tone palette with every brand Sorry, I'm not talking the best today. But, you know, back when it was, you know, all unique, whatever, and now, you know, there's a red tone palette by every brand. But that was definitely a favorite. You know, now, you know, it's again, I probably wouldn't buy it because that thing is way overpriced, $38 for 8 shades. No, thank you. And I have it. I have it in so many different incarnations from the same brand, from different brands, from more affordable brands, you know. But it's very important. It deserves a place of respect in helping me develop what I like and look for in an eyeshadow color theory. Then something else that's very important in developing me as a person is this is kind of an all-encompassing. There are a couple different palettes, but they're kind of, I'm lumping them all together. I know that's cheating. I always cheat when I do these. But the Sugar Pill Heartbreaker palettes, as well as the Sparkle Baby and the, it's a dark themed one. I'll put pictures of it. I've decluttered it. I don't remember what dark matter. I don't know. But the Sugar Pill experience was so monumental in my color development, you know? I paid, I think, because the Heartbreaker palettes are discontinued, and I think I bought them off Sugar Pill. So that tells you how old those are. But, you know, they were just these beautiful, bright, gorgeous colors, you know, and at the time I was just like, I'm gonna do green up to my eyebrow and I'm gonna do purple and I'm gonna, you know, there wasn't any blending, there wasn't any definition, there wasn't any, you know, ombreing it out and deepening it out in the, no, we're just gonna take the color and slather it everywhere. I remember I did, oh my goodness, a mermaid look and I used the blue, whatever, to contour absolutely horribly. You know, there's just so many good, kind of awful, cringy memories of using these eyeshadows and developing, you know, who I am as a person, you know, not just who I am with makeup, but who I was style and aesthetic wise and everything like that. I mean, these palettes that I'm talking about are basically what shaped who and what I am from a outward appearance today. Which is honestly pretty nifty because it's so interesting to think and look and see as I was going through and thinking about this and realizing which ones were still in my collection and palettes that I honestly figured I would never ever declutter, you know, for one reason or another. Obviously, if they're bad, they're bad. But palettes that I thought would be, you know, in that top 10 for as long as I was wearing makeup have just kind of been like, all right, no, they're the ghosts of eyeshadow and makeup past. I'm not that person anymore. And it's really interesting. I'm looking at this and kind of delving up into that, and I'm thinking, what's it going to be in 5 years? I love me the modern renaissance. I love me the soft glam. Y'all know that shit has lasted a very long time. But in 5 years, I wonder if something else is going to come out where I'm going to be like, that's not in my top 10 anymore, which sounds crazy to me now, but thinking back then, not having the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca remix in my top 10, I was like, well, that's never gonna happen. There isn't gonna be anything that's ever gonna surpass this palette. So it's just sort of an interesting go around that, I admit this ended up being a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit, I may be, a little bit crazy and loopy from being sick, and that's why. But it was just so fun to literally go through and think and look about and being like, oh yeah, couple years ago, that thing was the shiznit. Why was it the shiznit to me? And then looking at what I look for in a palette, while I think a big telling one is the Lorac Pro palettes, where I'm like, the quality, yeah, sure, whatever. But those are not color schemes that I would go out of my way to buy for any reason. Even for doing the vampire and the whatever and the other thing, I'm sure I could find that for a lot more affordable. But back in the day, that was my shiz. And I'm sure for a couple of y'all who have been with me since day number one, you're all like, yeah, I remember that, especially that Sweet Peach, the Lorac, so many of these. I was just like, these are the end all be all. And now I'm like, not so much. All right, that is what I have for this video today. That was a little bit interesting, a little bit different than I expected to go. I would love to hear y'all's opinions on the palettes I talked about and some palettes that you thought were the most absolutely amazing thing 5 years ago, or 4 or 3 or whatever, And if you still absolutely love it, or if it's something that you found, a better replacement, one reason or another. Or if it's just a palette that your style and your aesthetic and your technique is just sort of outgrown. I could probably do this a couple times over, talking about palettes that, kind of like throwback of like palettes that I've used way back in the whatever and thought way they were amazing. And now it's just like, they've just kind of been replaced, and they're not palettes that I wouldn't give a second thought to purchasing again. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!